want to welcome on now Geoff Blum, one of the TV voices for the world champion Houston Astros, 14-year MLB career in his own right, won a World Series with the 2005 White Sox. We're going to get to that as well. But Geoff, thanks for being with me. How are you?
No, good to be on. I'm doing actually pretty good right now. I'm in Pittsburgh and the weather's nice.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being with us. We'll get to some stuff in your career I'm curious about, but let's just start with a couple of Astros-related things. Now, I am a diehard Mariners fan and have been my entire life. I think when Mike Trout comes to the plate, there's nobody more than him that I fear. Yordan Alvarez is 1A in that. I'm thinking about now, as a pitcher, how do you get this guy out? He supposedly has a bum hand still, and every time I look, he's got a 435-foot home run. How do you get this guy out?
You know what? It's really interesting. You've got to be pretty creative, and you've got to be able to attack early with some good strikes, because as good a hitter as he is and as good as Yordan commands the strike zone, he can be very patient. But at the same time, if he's got a program or an idea of what he wants to do in that at bat, or if he's picked up on something that you've been using against him, he will anticipate it, much like we saw in some of those early, early in the count against Robbie Ray, the big home run. Sorry to talk about it, but it was the same thing when Alvarado came out of the bullpen in Game 6 of the World Series. It didn't take many pitches for him to go out there and do some damage. So he's got a very good idea before he steps in the box, and I think that's what makes him probably most dangerous. But then again, if you make a mistake later in the count, he makes you pay for it, and that's probably the biggest thing, is he doesn't miss very often when he gets a mistake.
You were around a bunch of organizations as a player. You've seen a bunch of different player development models. How have the Astros been able to just churn out guys like they have? Because all the way back, Dallas Keuchel leaves, no problem. George Springer leaves, no problem. Carlos Correa leaves, no problem. Here they are year after year. What's in the secret sauce there?
They had a really good idea when Jim Crane bought this team and brought in Jeff Luhnow. Jeff Luhnow had a game plan. He had a process, and he kept saying, trust it, because 2013-14 were not pretty games. Those were not pretty rosters. I know the word tanking comes up a lot, but there was just certain limitations that he had in place on those 13-14 teams. And what that did is it led to going out and getting a lot of number one picks, at the top of every draft class. He did a great job of choosing Carlos Correa, taking a chance on him. And then Alex Bregman, Lance McCullers, some of these supplemental picks that just kind of get overlooked. Kyle Tucker. He found the money to bring these guys into this organization. But I agree with you in the sense that these guys are hyper talented, maybe not very good examples because their talent level is so good. But we're seeing guys like Corey Julks, Jeremy Pena, some of these later round, 8th round pick, Hunter Brown. How do they do that? But they do a very good job of scouting. They have an idea of what they want to plug into their organization. And then they go out there and train these guys that having the zone command and smashing strikes inside the zone is the way to go about it. And for whatever reason, everybody's drinking this out of the same faucet and they're playing well.
Tell me if this was different than I remember it. But when I was growing up watching baseball, I felt like if you threw hard, you lived off your fastball. You challenged guys, you lived off your fastball. And now I look at the Astros, and they're so frustrating to watch as an opposing fan because, look, Framber Valdez throws 96 miles an hour. I feel like every pitch is a curveball. Lance McCullers throws 96 miles an hour. Every pitch is a slider, essentially. How different is that kind of philosophically from when you were playing?
It was established the fastball. And if you go back to those late 90s Atlanta Brave rotations, that's who I grew up facing. And it was establish the fastball, a way to get ahead in the count. And then you can work off of that with your changeups, with your split fingers, with your sliders, with your curveballs, and just try and work off that fastball. That idea has changed. And you're starting to see a lot of these numbers as far as the fastball usage is now below 50% in Major League Baseball, which is astonishing because you're right. The majority of guys that throw 95 plus is much greater than it was when I was playing, yet I saw more fastballs during the era I was playing in. Now, spin to win is the idea, and the bigger the spin rate, the more off speed you're going to see. And I think it's the idea that it's a harder pitch maybe to hit out if you're able to locate it, and it's a harder pitch to stay on. So they really feel that those breaking pitches are a good way to set up fastballs late, because you'll see a lot of breaking balls slider down in the zone, and then late with those 2-strike counts, you'll see that fastball rushed at the top of the zone, and guys have a tough time catching up.
He's got 2 World Series titles, so I can't knock it, obviously. But do you think this style of pitching is what's led to these recurring arm problems for Lance McCullers? So many breaking balls over and over again?
You know what? It's a really good question. And I think, in talking to Lance and, having the understanding of your own physicality and maybe your own body, lends itself to the opportunity. He talks about a natural arm slot that makes his curveball and his slider that much better than everybody else's. He's able to, you keep hearing pronate and some of these crazy words, but he's able to find that arm slot and maximize the spin by the way his arm naturally moves. And who knows, everybody's built differently. I don't know how many pitches are on an ulnar nerve or on a UCL joint, and things like that. So maybe it's just the repetition and the amount, but I know that, this day and age of max effort, maybe max effort and throwing the spin like that creates, damage over the years. But at the same time, if that's your bread and butter and you're getting outs, who's to tell these guys not to do it? And as good as Tommy John surgery is these days, these guys come back almost better and stronger because the ligament's stronger, but they're also developing the muscles around that to protect that joint also and to protect that ligament. So, if he's successful with it, I'm not going to tell him not to do it.
You're a guy who knows the grind of a major league season, knows the ebbs and flows of a major league season. I am a reactive fan. I'm freaking out. The Mariners are 4-7 right now. At what point do the players actually start to take stock of what's going on, start to get a little antsy?
You know what? For a hitter, I think it's like right around 150 at bats where you kind of settle in and you go, okay, I'm gonna hover around the number I'm at right here. You may go out there and get your production numbers by the end of the year, but I think the fact that most players understand that after 6 months, that number on the back of the baseball card is going to be very similar year after year, so there isn't panic, and panic usually leads to a lot of remorse. And I think these guys understand that the less they panic, the better they'll be in the long run. So. And having watched the Astros over the last couple of years, understanding that, maybe playing 500 baseball in April is okay because they've been so good late in the season. But I still believe that, you can't win a championship in April, but you can definitely lose one, because if you're playing from behind and trying to fight back in a division, it becomes extremely tough. But even for, just speaking to you as a Mariners fan and Mariners fans who are probably listening to you, be patient. I think you've got a very good ball club. The division's going to be a little bit tighter this year, but your starting rotation is what encourages me about the Seattle Mariners. I think there's a great starting staff there, and they're going to be able to score some runs to win.
Well, let's hope. 2 extra inning losses in a row has me frustrated. Let's move to your career. I'm 33 years old. I think for all people around my age, there's a fascination with the Montreal Expos because it's been so long since we have seen them. I remember them well, but it's been so long since we've seen them. You came up with the Expos and got a chance to play with a lot of guys that, I grew up collecting baseball cards of. Orlando Cabrera and Vlad Guerrero, a young lad who I think hit, I want to say 34 home runs the last year you were in Montreal in 2000 or 2001 or so. What was it like to play in Montreal, to play with the Expos, to play with the young Vlad? What was that like?
First of all, it was great. I got to know those guys. Jose Vidro, who spent some time up in Seattle too, was a phenomenal second baseman. Michael Barrett was a #1 pick. I got to, get to know him really well. There were guys throughout that organization that I really enjoyed, and it was a lot of fun to kind of come up in that generation because of those guys you just mentioned. I got to watch Vladdy in Double-A just obliterate, Double-A pitching, and we're just going, dear God, this guy's going to hurt somebody. He hits the ball so hard. But then you get to Montreal, and there's a certain love affair between, I think, Montreal and baseball that kind of fell apart with how things finished up there, unfortunately. I think there's still an opportunity to get back up there if they expand and give that city an opportunity with a great stadium to see a good team. But it's something that I have a hard time explaining to my kids. I've got 4 daughters, and they're like, what teams did you play for? And I say Montreal Expos, and they're like, Dad, that team doesn't exist. I'm like, I know, it's crazy. But I will always have an affinity for them and Felipe Alou, the manager that I played for up there in Montreal, just because of the opportunity you're given. And it's too bad that it turned into a space or a team that nurtured talent, had phenomenal talent, but just continued to trade it away or not be able to sign it back. So the city really lost some of that loyalty and some great players that went through there.
I remember reading and watching videos about how the Seattle Sonics left Seattle in the NBA and moved to Oklahoma City, and the players talking about they were cut off from the media and resources were taken, and it felt like it was being kind of sabotaged from the inside. When you were in Montreal at the end, could you feel the end was coming, even though the end hadn't officially come yet?
Yeah, the scary secret about it was I was on contraction calls with the union. We were trying to figure
Yeah.
out what we were going to do for jobs because they were going to eliminate Montreal and Minnesota, I think it was at the time,
Yeah.
because
Right.
the fan bases weren't supporting them, and we thought that was ludicrous. From a selfish standpoint, we were in the big leagues and we felt like we belonged. But yeah, towards the end of it, it got so weird because Jeffrey Loria bought the team in Montreal and then decided to flip it and go down to by the Miami Marlins. And then we were taken over by Major League Baseball. So, we were kind of cut off and left in limbo, so to speak, because we didn't know what we were going to end up doing. Sadly, but fortunately, I got traded away in 2002, the same spring that Major League Baseball took over. I think I was their first trade of that
Wow.
regime,
Hmm.
and they traded me to Houston. So I was fortunate in the sense I got out in time before they transferred into the Washington Nationals and had to play those games in Puerto Rico
Yeah.
and things like that. Which, shoot, I would have played in Puerto Rico. That would have been all right with me.
Let's go to your time with the White Sox. You win a World Series in 05. You've actually got a statue outside U.S. Cellular Field, although I think it's got a different name now. The home run you hit in Game 3 against the Astros. One of my best baseball stories is I was at Game 1 of the World Series in Chicago. My dad is a diehard White Sox fan. It was
Nice.
Roger Clemens for the Astros, Jose Contreras for the White Sox. And the best memory I have, and I still tell this story, is Ozzie Guillen goes out to the mound in the 8th inning, I think, and he doesn't point to the bullpen. He points to the bullpen and he goes, "I want the tall guy and the fat guy." And he's referring to Bobby Jenks, and he does the hand signals. It's one of the coolest things I've seen on a field. And that was great. Talk to me about the 05 White Sox run, because that was pretty cool.
It was very cool. I got traded at the deadline that year from San Diego to Chicago, and it was crazy because we were in first place with San Diego. I had a role as I was a utility guy, filling in for guys across the infield, and we had a good thing going. And I get called into Bruce Bochy's office, Fred Ullman and Kevin Towers, the GM and assistant GM. They're kind of sitting there with this sad look on their face, and they're like, "Ozzie Guillen called, and he wants you on his ball club, so we traded you." And what a lot of people don't know is having played against Ozzie, and then there was a moment when Jeff Torborg took over in Montreal. My third base coach was Ozzie Guillen. So I had a relationship with him, and he had a very good idea of who I was. And he actually paid me one of the greatest compliments I think I've ever been paid in Major League Baseball. He talked about the trade after the World Series. And he said at that moment, because they didn't make a splashy trade to go get a superstar, it was just a peripheral guy like me, a role player that could fill in for Joe Crede, Paul Konerko, and relieve those guys. And he said, the reason I traded for him because I knew he wasn't going to screw up my clubhouse. And I think that kind of speaks to the Chicago White Sox of the 05 year, is the fact that they had such good team unity. And we're all pushing in the right direction, because it honestly felt like every time I dug in, there were 24 guys behind me. Every time I made a play on defense, there were 24 guys going, "Nice play." We were all on the same page. We were feisty. We were nasty. We drank probably too much, but we knew how to play as hard off the field as we did on the field. And fortunately, it paid off with a great moment in 05 with us winning that World Series.
I believe it was the final out of the World Series, if I'm remembering correctly. I know there are people with better StatCast numbers at this point. I don't think in my mind I have any ball ever being thrown harder than Juan Uribe throws from shortstop over to first. He had a cannon. In my mind, he had an absolute cannon.
Yeah, there were so many great plays throughout that. And that's probably one of the more underrated World Series, because you say, oh, the White Sox swept the Astros, but the run differential was only about 5 or 6, I think, in that series.
Can we get a rare Scott Podsednik home run in Game 2 that helped win that? I mean, I don't remember Scott.
Poor Brad Lidge, man. He had a rough postseason.
Yeah, no, that was a great World Series run. Hey, Geoff, I'll get you out of here on this. It's our end of interview question with every guest here, and you're having spent time in the league for so long, you're gonna have a good answer to this, I'm sure. Most famous contact in your phone is who?
Oh, dang. I mean, for those country star people out there, I've got Cody Jinks in the phone. It's a good one. I mean, as many people as I've hung out with, I've never been able to get their numbers from them. I know that if I texted Greg Maddux right now, he would respond.
That's good.
Yeah, he's a good one. But I mean, that's probably, I mean, in my mind, he's a celebrity just because he was so good and he's been a good friend to me. But yeah, that's probably the one that I would go to if I needed to show somebody, hey, check this out. I got Greg Maddox's number.
And he responds. That's the important part. Last week,
Exactly.
we had Kevin Brown, the Astros broadcaster, or the Orioles broadcaster, excuse me, and he had Bill Walton and said he was on a response basis with Bill Walton. So that's good. I have Tim Tebow's number, never gotten a number back, so I've never gotten a response back. So I'll have to work on who my best respondable number is. So Geoff, man, we appreciate it. Continue your great work with the Astros. I'm sure they will be there in the end, and I will be frustrated 13 more times as they play the Mariners coming up this season. So Geoff, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
No, great being on with you. I'm looking forward to those Mariners matchups, by the way.
I'm looking forward to hopefully not going 3-10 during them. So we'll see what happens.